All right, Council. Council, it's 5 o'clock. It's time to get down to business, so I will call the SIC meeting to order.
Okay.
Does that work better? Much more resonance now, thank you. I'll call the meeting to order. It's 5 o'clock, time to get down to business. We will be joined, my understanding, by Councillor Madigan when he is available. He had a previous commitment, but will be joining us. Today we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe and Ottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. I will look to the Deputy Mayor for the adoption of the agenda, that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for February 5, 2020 be adopted as presented.
Mayor Saunderson, so moved.
Seconded by Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Any declarations of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that situation as we progress through the agenda, please let us know. Deputations 4.1, Water and Wastewater Rate Study. Mr. Fryer. I know you're very familiar with council protocol, so you have 10 minutes, Mr. Fryer.
Thank you. I'll just work the slides from here, will I? With the arrow button?
Controller there, yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor Saunderson, Deputy Mayor Hull, Council, and staff. To begin, I wanted to thank Deputy Clerk Dahl for assisting me with being included on this agenda. When I requested to speak on this issue to Council for your last SIC meeting, it was deferred over to today. Unfortunately, after reviewing the report and considering the stage everything is at, it may appear that part of what I cover is after the fact. I have brief opening comments prior to moving on to the few guidance slides I have to assist in conveying my input. In that regard, over the 4 decades I've been presenting in various roles, this time as a ratepayer and taxpayer, to Collingwood councils on sustainable water and wastewater rates, this has been a good approach to stay on point. Part of what I'll speak to is due to concerns that have come to my mind over the past few months on the process and the assumptions incorporated in the study. It also somewhat involves the closing of the loop on the understanding I had from initiatives undertaken and issues raised during the last term of council, as well as during my time as a council representative on the Collingwood Public Utilities Service Board. In addition, there will be references on policy and objectives established by prior councils which are being considered today. Mostly it is about why are my water charges increasing and the mitigation strategy being employed because it doesn't provide an offset for me. As a starting point though, importantly, it was very good that the study's wholesome analysis confirmed that water and wastewater continue to be in strong financial position. Initial concerns surfaced when this slide was presented on December 9th. Firstly, in my experience, comparing water and wastewater separately is difficult enough, but combining can accentuate the difficulties. Unlike comparing municipal electricity charges, which are closely regulated, so therefore there is more consistency, we know that the municipal water systems have major differences that affect costs. We all know that Collingwood has a first-class filtration system. Probably most, if not all of these, do not. Wasaga water is from wells, thus having lower operating costs. Clearview is wells too, but fewer ratepayers to spread the cost over. The concern here was the indication that the town of Blue Mountains was as low as is shown here. It gave me pause, as that was very contrary to my recollections, and of course they purchased water from Collingwood. I believe it should have shown as just under $1,100, but more importantly to me, water is just over $540, so higher than Collingwood's charges. Another, not so much of a concern, was that the other major municipal customer, New Tecumseh, wasn't listed. But I will revisit New Tecumseh matters later because I know total water charges are about the same amount as Collingwood's. So from covering these things with this slide, I'll move on. In my opinion, the study's process didn't follow the usual steps for this type of a matter. More so, it partly explains why my coming before council now appears somewhat after the fact. December 9th, there really was no opportunity for specific output or input at that time because of things like the town of Blue Mountain. Also, on some of the slides of the update, only some of the slides of the update were briefly reviewed, and it wasn't included with the circulated agenda. The presentation wasn't available until early January, and then without the draft study contents to assist in fulsome review. As per the request on the 9th for public feedback, I submitted a series of questions and inputs, expecting that those and responses would be circulated to council. The report only says comments were considered, so I'm here now covering some of it. For February 5th, my understanding of the process was that council was considering options today. The report only has one, though. I will note at this point in time that I recognize the time crunch council is in. As outlined, this study will be a central part of the upcoming 5-year Water Strategic Financial Plan that must be tabled by July to meet water taking permit renewal requirements. It is unfortunate options can't be more fully considered, but that is the reality of the situation. This study is significantly less detailed at 50 pages of content compared to the current one of 160, which I would submit makes it difficult to review and get a complete understanding. So in trying to provide additional input on these items, I readily admit that there's a possibility I've had a misinterpretation. Regarding the fixed and variable, we know that either rate structure could be altered to change that ratio. Collingwood's current structure is based on a unique situation, the selling of half or more of the filtered water Collingwood produces to other municipalities. That contributes significantly to the atypical situation of a 25% variable, 75% fixed ratio. Essentially, in theory, variable rates generally relate to the cost of producing the filtered water. Past councils considered that the New Tecumseh revenue mostly would reduce these costs for Collingwood consumers, thus a lower variable factor, with importantly to council, a smaller delta to the New Tecumseh production rate. Another reason is that Collingwood had to provide a solution of an extensive filtration capability in a very short period of time. The fixed charge factor reflects not only the usual costs of distribution, but an unexpected debt recovery component because there were no reserves for that requirement or for future needs. The report says the humpback rate is specifically designed for Collingwood, promotes residential conservation, maintains attractiveness to industry which may rely heavily on water and wastewater services. Regarding design, it wasn't clear as to why the HBR is designed for Collingwood. The methodology appears to be very rarely utilized. It also significantly increases the delta to the New Tecumseh production charge. Regarding conservation, firstly, conservation has been and always should be strongly promoted. Additionally, in my experience, I have always found Collingwood ratepayers to be very conservation minded. Utilizing a surcharge methodology was deemed to be the best approach for Collingwood because it was designed to resonate with the largest residential consumers of water. That group was identified as having the greatest opportunity for substantial conservation. The former board had plans to phase in a reduction of the 40 cubic meter level and possibly expand the active months for an even better opportunity. As in the past, it would have incorporated a direct customer approach, which had always worked well. The study refers to a 5% overall reduction for some potential conservation efforts. It notes, though, that generally new consumers tend to have low-end water use. There wasn't enough detail to discern much about these impacts. There will be some offset too, as the surcharge rate is going to be 20% lower, or the surcharge group will see a 20% lower rate. On the matter of attractiveness, my comment has some overlap with conservation too. It isn't included in the report, but the processed water system to the industrial park should be maintained. That system probably has been one of our most positive environmental initiatives. It also is beneficial from an attractiveness standpoint to any high water use industries that may not be heavy wastewater users. In regards to the reduction, the study indicates there is an opportunity due to the good fiscal standing. I certainly recognize a reduction in charges is always well received. It appears the choices were either hold rates as is through to 2025 or the proposed reduction to reserves to mitigate another reserve. Is that the best use of the opportunity? Tying back to previous council and board discussions, in my opinion, to maximize environmental and efficiency impacts, it may be better to use the opportunity to phase in a more equitable user-based stormwater management program concept.
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Fryer.
I will close as follows. Regards to summarize input, in my opinion, a simpler approach of maintaining the current water rate structure with appropriate changes to reduce the fixed variable split would achieve better results. As I noted earlier, I had anticipated a decrease for my costs, especially with the 2020 10% increase in non-rate revenues. I have attempted to provide constructive input based on only having reviewed the study data for just a few hours. It has been substantially précédé in consideration of time factors, so I realize I may not have been completely clear and can provide follow-up as required. I appreciate your indulgence on that. Regarding the strategic financial plan, as I noted earlier from the report, the 2020 operating expenses of $5.1 million pretty much equals the forecasted amount found in the current strategic financial plan before 2015 board and other related reductions. The study also forecasts lower future annual increases for some of the key cost drivers. There will be opportunity with the pending strategic financial plan process to delve into that. Neither detail nor time allows for it right now. And then finally on the, what I would call maybe yet to be determined, the new Tecumseh inputs could change significantly or not when negotiations hopefully come to successful fruition. As noted in the past, maintaining most, if not all, of the beneficial aspects of the current agreement, such as the 5-cent cubic meter benefit of use charge to any other sales, could provide additional benefit to Collingwood ratepayers. In my opinion, the proposed changes are significant in light of the unknowns about New Tecumseh. During the staff's reports coming up next, there will be additional clarifications provided, so I look forward to hearing their presentation and then, of course, council's subsequent discussions. I will close off at that and again express my appreciation to council for allowing me to present my input to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fryer. 10 minutes on the nose. Council, any comments or questions for Mr. Fryer? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff reports. And the first staff report 5.1 is PW 2020-04 Water and Wastewater Rate Study. And I'll look to Ms. Slam. Can you kick this off for us, please, Becky?
My apologies for being tardy. I had to work. I do apologize.
Welcome, Councilor Matty.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, committee. Today we would like to present to you the results of our water and wastewater rate study. This has been completed by Hemson Consulting Limited. And I would like to mention that we do have some representatives from Hemson here today, Andrew and Chris, and they will be, they were the lead on this financial exercise, and they're available here to answer any questions or provide any clarifications on the report and recommendations presented within it for you today. Water and wastewater systems are user-pay systems. The revenues and costs associated with these systems are not incorporated into the tax levy. The completion of a financial exercise is required to develop the rates and ensure the town meets all financial obligations of the system through a long-term recovery plan. Water and wastewater rates fund current and future operations, non-growth related shares and capital expansion, and the rehabilitation and eventual replacement of existing infrastructure. The supporting documents referenced and incorporated in the study include the Master Servicing Plan, which identified infrastructure needs to support growth, the Development Charges Study, which identified the growth and non-growth shares of that future infrastructure, and the Asset Management Plan, which identified the asset replacement schedule. I wanted to provide a brief review of our existing rate structure. The current rates were set by the 2013 rate study completed by Watson and Associates. The study was updated in 2016 for the Water Financial Plan. Our structure includes both fixed and variable components for water and wastewater, and includes a seasonal surcharge for water only, and that's during the summer months. If you use more than 40 cubic meters a month, you'll see a surcharge. You'll pay a higher rate. The surcharge does not apply to ICI customers, and both rates have been increased annually as recommended by these reports, which is 2.5% for water and 3.5% for wastewater. When completing the rate analysis and developing the rate model, various factors were considered. These included current consumption for both water and wastewater for different users, future demands based on anticipated growth, a full recovery of operational costs, full recovery of capital costs, and a need to maintain reserves for rehabilitation and replacement. Starting with consumption, we looked at how will consumption demand change in the next 10 years. So to determine that, we looked at the projected population and employment growth. We anticipated the number of connections for both water and wastewater, and we considered conservation. We know that there's going to be we're seeing demographic changes already. We're seeing fewer people in each home, which is lowering the per unit demand. We're seeing ICI initiatives, which is a natural business evolution to improve their own water efficiency. We're seeing efficiency in appliances, and we have incorporated a 5% reduction in use with our new rate structure because we have a greater financial emphasis on the volume of water used. Overall, as the number of people and connections increase, we expect to see a slightly lower water consumption per connection. Next, we considered operation and maintenance costs. Rates fund operating costs to maintain the system in accordance with provincial regulations. We're anticipating an increase in water costs over the 10-year period, and wastewater costs are essentially the same. Much of this change is attributed to general operation increases, and we followed the town's budget for what those estimates are. We see a reduction in user pay debt. There's existing non-growth related debt obligations that will be paid off during this 10-year period. We've incorporated that we're going to see a water treatment plant expansion in the next 5 years. So starting in 2025, we've increased operational costs by 2% to account for a larger facility. And we've also considered service enhancements and given some financial consideration to increase costs to maintain and service a larger system. With the operation and maintenance costs, we also considered the non-user rate revenues. So this includes the sale of water to New Tecumseh and the town of Blue Mountains, and also our service contract with the Township of Clearview for wastewater services. We've incorporated a 2% increase over the rate period. And we do note that the New Tecumseh revenue will be reviewed and adjusted as needed once the new water supply agreement is established. We must also consider infrastructure and capital. So we have a significant value in asset replacement costs. Our water system is younger, and our wastewater system is a little bit older. Growth pays for growth infrastructure, but the rates must pay for the non-growth component and replacement of this existing infrastructure. The non-growth contribution comes from reserves. To define how the rates must account for these replacement costs, we looked at the asset management plan and the recent work on our asset inventory and cost data, and considered the master servicing plan and DC study to determine future infrastructure needs and non-growth contributions. We also looked at the existing reserve balances. We will note that we tried to balance the reserve, or Henson balance the reserve contributions that are needed over the 10-year period to avoid any impractical increases. So taking all of these elements into consideration, when we're developing the rate structure, we took all of these elements into consideration in developing the rate structure. Different municipalities use different structures. We would classify our current structure as a constant rate for the variable component with an increased seasonal rate for water in the summer. When considering the options for Collingwood, Henson balanced our interests in cost recovery, equity among users, conservation, administration costs, and economic development. There are 3 changes that are proposed to you today to Collingwood's rate structure. The first is a realignment of the fixed and variable recovery so that the town is not relying on the fixed component as much. We have created consumption tiers for a user pay model. The more water you use, the more water you pay. The 4th tier lowers the water rate for predominantly ICI users. And also, we're presenting a lower wastewater fixed charge. The wastewater fixed component is high compared to other municipalities. This has provided for healthy reserves in preparation for asset replacement. We believe we are now in a position to reduce this while maintaining sufficient contributions into the reserves for our future needs. This chart shows you where users will fall within the proposed tiers. As you can see by the blue, approximately 75% of the residential users will fall within the first tier, and these users will see a drop in their rates for 2020. Shown on the right in the red, 70% of the non-residential or ICI users will fall under the 4th tier, and this is appropriate as we want to remain a competitive place for businesses to establish and thrive. They will see a lower variable rate. This slide shows the comparison between the 2019 and the proposed 2020 rates for water. These rates apply to both the residential and what we call the general service account, which is the ICI accounts. You will see the drop in the fixed charges balanced by an increase in the variable charges with the different consumption tiers. This slide shows a comparison of the 2019 to the 2020 proposed wastewater rates. Again, these rates apply to both residential and general service connections. And again, you will see a drop in the fixed component, which is larger on the wastewater side, balanced by a small increase in the variable charges with the different consumption tiers. This chart provides a comparison of rates on a range of residential user accounts. So if you're a low user that uses approximately 100 cubic meters a year, you're going to see a 22% decrease in your rate charges in 2020. If you're a high residential user that's using 500 or more cubic meters a year, which is about 42 cubic meters a month, you will see an increase of approximately 1% over what you'd be paying with today's structure. On top of Henson making 2 presentations to committee and the public, we provided the core rate study information on Engage Collingwood and communicated this opportunity through our social media channels. The Engage site had 107 visitors with few comments that were left behind. We also got a few comments through Facebook and some general emails. I provided the general nature of the comments on the slide. You see some people are happy to see the rates lowering. We have some agreement, disagreement with the fixed components, agreement or acknowledgement to save for infrastructure replacement, some preference to the structure of inclining block over humpback, mention about incorporating our revenue from New Tecumseth or the sale of water to New Tecumseth and Town Blue Mountains, and a question about multi-unit dwellings. We don't have a separate rate for those. Sorry. Actually, I'll go back to that. I've already mentioned, but I wanted to acknowledge again, right? There are many different ways that rates can be structured. We feel we've considered the public feedback that we receive on a regular basis when we've developed this structure for your consideration. Primarily, and with the comments we get every day are the rates are high and the fixed component is high, and people would like to see equity among the user groups. So that's a comment outside of what we received through Engage. So for the last slide, I just wanted to present what is being proposed for the future, what the future rates will look like. the proposed increases to both the fixed and variable components. This will average out to approximately 2% increase each year to the overall rates. We will need to review the rates once the new Tecumseh water supply agreement is established. And though this rate study considers financial obligations and recovery over a 10-year period, it is recommended that we complete a rate study every 3 to 5 years. In our case, with the change to our recovery model, we will watch how revenues change in 2020 and 2021 to determine when the next rate study should be completed. So following committee and council's approval of the rate study, the proposed rates will be incorporated into the fees and service charges bylaw scheduled to come to SIC in March 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. As this is a standing committee meeting, before we get to questions from council, I will open the floor if there's anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment on the presentation you just heard. Come forward, please. You can just state your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Wendy McKenzie and I live at 192nd Street. I need more than that.
That's what I needed. Any
Okay.
comments?
There are quite a few units in this town that you guys, or council, previously have allowed to have ancillary apartments, which is a house on a house, but they have one water line in. Why aren't you having 2 water charges into that? Because they're only paying once, and we're paying once for 2 people, but they're paying once for 4 people.
Okay, well, I think that would get caught in the variable component, but Ms. Slam, do you have a response for that?
Sure.
Thank you.
So our town policy is one property, one service. So you are correct, right? If there is more than one unit on that property, then there's only one fixed charge that's being charged to that property. So, and His Worship is also correct in saying that property should use more water, and so we should see an increase in the consumption that they use. With the rate structure that we propose, where we're lowering the fixed component and putting some more reliance on the variable part, that type of property might see an increase. I'd have to look at each one in particular.
Good, thank you, Peggy. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Seeing none, the staff recommendation is that staff report PW 2020-04 be received and council approve the water and wastewater rate study by Hempson Consulting Limited, and the council approve the recommended water and wastewater rates for 2020. I have a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor McLeod. Questions and comments, council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I really liked the report and where we ended up, specifically with the focus on users. I think residents had mentioned to me over the years, I know they did, that they really felt their conservation efforts didn't really result in much of a difference in their bill. So I think this will keep people incentivized, because I think they really kind of gave up on it a bit because they really weren't noticing a difference. So I like where we've gone with it, and also I think Director Slama maybe mentioned a little bit about water affordability for our residents, because people are struggling with accommodation costs and their taxes and their food costs, and getting to a point where, you know, sometimes water is very difficult to afford, and the wastewater costs that we have. So the question I had is, I thought we were running a stormwater management consideration through a kind of a parallel report process somewhere in our system. We have something in the system, I think, that's coming through, do we not? Through to Peggy, Director Slama?
Yes. Director Slama?
Through your worship, yes, we do. The stormwater system would be, consideration of costs associated with the stormwater system should be kept separate from water and wastewater, and we have kind of initiated that process through the first phase of our master stormwater plan.
Thank you. And then just another question to make sure I'm perfectly clear on the consumption charge and the variable portion. We have the 4 tiers. So if you used 149 cubic meters, your whole bill is done at the 1.072, or the first 8 cubic meters per month is done at one rate, then the next after that, so you would have several rates. Because I was just asking myself, what would be the incentive to land at 149 cubic meters? You may as well just push out the doors another 2 cubic meters and pay the less average rate. So I was just wanting to clarify that.
Director Slama?
Through the chair, an account that uses 149 cubic meters in a month would progress through the tiers.
Thank you.
Mr. McLeod?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Director Slima. You are expecting us to, if all goes according to your plan, pass a bylaw in March. At what point would these new rates become effective for our ratepayers?
Director Slama, sorry.
Through the chair, I'll just ask Treasurer Leonard to provide clear indication on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. If the, we were intending on bringing the fees and charges to the next SIC meeting. However, that would put the rates effective April. Or council could request a separate wastewater fee bylaw, and we could prepare that, because it's a lot of trouble to have that and just bring it to a council meeting so you could have it in effect for March. It would be up to council.
Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I had generally, I'll echo Councillor Jeffrey's comments in regard to overall recommendations for the plan. It makes sense to me to reduce the fixed at variable. That makes the end user more responsible. I had some concerns about the assumptions that we were making in terms of what metered connections would grow, what would be flat, what might decline, but that was answered in that we would be redoing a study every 3 to 5 years. So we're not going to be in a situation where this model is not paying us according to our forecasts. I'm going to slip into the weeds a little bit. There was an item, an analysis of the business sector, commercial industrial, where it illustrated rates that various businesses were having today and how those rates would change with the 2020 rate structure, assuming it was approved. And it, of course, looks at industrial, looked at commercial, it looked at food service, and it actually looked at 2 food services, one being fast food or chain restaurant, and the other being just restaurant. And a red flag came to me in that the restaurant component, according to the calculations, would experience quite a substantial rate increase based on this model. And the chain restaurant would actually experience a slight decline. So I was concerned, having been actually in the food service business, knowing how tight the margins are and knowing how important water is to the operation of the businesses. I did have a question in regard to that because I realized that this was a limited sample. So I was wondering if I could direct that question to Director Slama.
Yes, Dr. Slama.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to, if I may, request that Andrew Mirabella from Hemson provide some comment as he knows the group. He'd speak to the group that was selected in the report.
Thank you. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Through the chair. So effectively, the 10 businesses on that specific table 14 on page 41 are a random sample of businesses. and not really representative of the entire industry, specifically with all chain restaurants or all independent restaurants. Just specifically of what some of these samples of various institutional, commercial, service area businesses, what some of the rate implications could be relative to them, and obviously certain businesses, such as that particular restaurant, as they're a higher volume user, more than the chain in that particular instance, would see more of a rate increase. I guess also important to note that it's on a percentage basis higher, but certainly not the highest in terms of the dollar impact as some of the other industries are there that are representative on this list. So I can appreciate the point, and perhaps just for the final version that perhaps gets made public onto the website, there's a caveat and a paragraph that states that these are sample representative of businesses throughout the community, and the restaurant industry itself will not see all these different types of increases or decreases. It's very specific to the nature of that one, and obviously for confidentiality purposes, we didn't name the addresses and specific businesses associated with
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Hamlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions through you, I think, to Director Slama. I'm interested in the reduction for the summer being eliminated, or well, I should put it this way, the increase that would otherwise be there for the summer being eliminated. And I had thought it was offering a significant incentive to people to not overwater their lawns, which I think could be a big use of water in the summer. So I just wanted to know what the rationale was behind reducing the rates for the summer period.
Director Swam?
Thank you, through the chair. So it might be a matter of perspective, because I don't think that I would term that we're reducing the rates going forward. Residential homes that irrigate will see an increase in their costs compared to last year, and I think they'll see that if they use 38 cubic meters a month, or if they use 50 cubic meters a month. And the opportunity, I think it's better for us to provide an opportunity to our residents with offering various tiers, so that they can still do some irrigation, but there is an incentive not to irrigate too much. And again, we have the greater incentive or recognition of the people that are the lower users. In our previous structure, we just had the one rate and then the one seasonal increase, which was really geared towards irrigation.
Okay, thank you. I have two other questions. Okay. So the second one is, of course, you mentioned that we don't have a separate rates structure for individual units and multi-unit dwellings. And I take it that would include condominium buildings or apartment buildings. And I am perceiving that we are going to see an increase in multi-unit buildings in Collingwood over the next few years. And just wondering whether at some point we should be looking at separate metering for separate units in these kind of buildings to encourage conservation. And the builders have to know this so that they put the individual meters in when they come forward to do construction. So I'm just wondering what the staff's thought is around all that. Thank you.
Director Slama?
Through the chair, I agree that there's some merit to giving some consideration to multi-unit dwellings going forward. Currently, I will say that for most condominium developments, it is still 1 meter per unit, but there are multi-unit buildings where it's 1 meter per multi-units. So with the change that we're proposing with this structure, we're interested to see how those accounts change based on a higher consumption, and I believe there's some merit to considering multi-unit rates going forward, and that would be a good consideration in our review 3 to 5 years from now.
Okay, thank you. My last question has to do with the issue that Councillor Doherty raised. And I know whenever, an institution like the town is talking about imposing tax rates, you want to make sure there isn't a shift in the tax rate from one, I'll say, class to another. And I think that was the issue that Councillor Doherty raised. Will there be some monitoring of the issue to make sure that we don't, that if there is some shift taking place, that we can roll it back or deal with it? Through you, Chair.
Dr. Simon?
Through the chair, some accounts that are high users will see a shift and will see an increase in their rates. And we provided those comparisons of 10 random non-residential accounts so that you could see the potential change to some of our users. My hope is that when users need to pay more as they consume more, that we will see a reduction in their use, and we can monitor it, but right now our plan would be to implement those rates as they stand unless directed otherwise by council.
Thank you. CAO, you wanted to add something?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor. I don't think the intent of this rate study, and I take Councillor Doherty's point very, very seriously, as well as Councillor Hamlin. The intention of this study was not to shift the burden from the residential to the commercial or vice versa. The intention, I think, was to try and make sure that we move to a model that promotes conservation and try to get a fiscal framework to ensure that we continue to invest in our reserves to maintain the kind of system that we have. The point you made, I think, is an important one, and I think what we'll do is that we will make a commitment to ensure that we take a further look to the impact on that particular sector, and if there is any change, we will consider those changes when we come back with the rate and fees and charges bylaw.
Thank you, that's so helpful. Thank you.
Any other council members, questions or comments? I have a question then, and then a comment through to Director Salama. My understanding is when we established the new rates at the annual growth rates, will average out to be less than they were over the past rate study by about a percentage point. I think we're sitting at 2 and 2.5, whereas before it was growing at about 3.5 and 2.5. So when the dust settles, going forward with those annual rate increases, will be less moving forward?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Just the annual increases that we're projecting
Yes.
over the next 5 years, they will be less than they were over the previous, under the previous rate study.
Yes, that's correct.
So then
On average.
on average. So then together with the reductions or the impacts of the current or the proposed model, the rate increases moving forward will also be less on a year-over-year basis.
Yes, that's correct.
And then my brief comment then is that just looking at the 5 considerations we have before us with the cost recovery, the equity, the conservation, administration, and the economic development, given that sustainability is such a big topic these days, I endorse the movement from the fixed rate, reducing the fixed rate and increasing the variable rate component, recognizing that user pay, consumer pay, equity model promotes sustainability and conservation and puts it onto a consumer user pay basis more than it was before. So I think that moving forward, that's going to encourage people that feel their water rates are too high to use less. And that's something that's important to our infrastructure moving forward, whether it be the water or the wastewater, because the water generally goes out through the wastewater. So I will be supporting this. That said, unless there's any other comments, I'm going to call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Item 6, other business. 6.1, the Emergency Management 101 brief education session. Chief Parr, you're up.
I prefer to sit over there, but.
But when you're in the emergency, you're on your feet.
Thank you, Chair, Council, for this chance to just give a little update about emergency management. There's been a lot going on lately, and I thought it'd be a good time to just do a quick review. So where we started or how it started and where we are today. So it used to be Civil Protection Act, changed in 2001. A tragic event that happened that changed the whole world to look at emergency management. Changed the act to say it's Emergency Management Civil Protection Act. So that's where I get most of my authority out of to do anything in an emergency. The one thing I do want to stress is that health and safety is not exempt at any time in an emergency. So definition of an emergency. A situation or a pending situation caused by forces of nature, an accident, an intentional act, or otherwise constitutes a danger of major proportion to life and property. These situations could be threatened public safety, public health, the environment, property, critical infrastructure, and the economic stability. 3 categories is human cause, nature, and technology. So our emergency management program, we're mandated to have a program, and then I said it's under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. So here it says every municipality shall develop and implement an emergency management program, and the council of the municipality shall by bylaw adopt the emergency management plan or program. So within that, our program's in this book. So this is my Bible for emergency management. And there's stuff I'm not gonna cover, but I can answer questions if so needed at the end. So the emergency management program shall consist of emergency plan. So there's 2 plans. There's a public plan and the private plan. This is the private plan and it's that big. The public plan in here is a section that big. So that what's in the back is all our infrastructure information, personal phone numbers, contacts, and all that. It's a living document that we update constantly. So we're also mandated to have a training program and exercises. So within the year, we have a training session that I bring a third party in and we do some training. Last year, was it note taking? We've done a few, and what I have to report back to the OFMEM, the Office of the Fire Marshal Emergency Management, annually, and state that we met the requirements for compliance for emergency management. And they'll set out in their compliance for the annual compliance what we have to do and meet the program. So with the training, it's just not me that takes the training, it's the team. So the emergency, the team that we put together in the town, and I'll explain that on a slide later. So it's just not myself that takes the training and delivers the training, I take training along with the whole group. So the emergency control group, I guess. Public education on risk, public safety, we do that through, with Adam, through media releases, social media, and we also have the Emergency Management Preparedness Week in May of every year. And then any other elements required by the standards emergency management program. So, and it can change. It's this year for compliance, we have to have a meeting before we have our training, before we have our exercise. So emergency management coordinator, that's me. That's I don't know how I got it, but I inherited that position. Most municipalities don't have the resources or finances to have a department for this. So they look, and most municipalities, it falls within the fire service. So again, it says every municipality shall designate an employee of the municipality or a member of the council as its emergency management program coordinator. So I was designated, and this was done with bylaw. Some of my roles and responsibilities: make sure we have training, make sure that so emergency management coordinator coordinate development and implement of the municipal emergency program with the municipality, and shall coordinate municipal emergency management program insofar possible the emergency management programs of other municipalities. So we've done that. We have an agreement with the county. It's We have two agreements with the county. First of all, we have a social services agreement with the county, which helps Dean out when he's doing his role in emergency management. And then we also have an emergency response agreement with the county. And it's with the county, but it's all members of the county. So we have mutual aid in the fire service where if I need help at a fire, I can call other people in. An emergency, now that we have this agreement in place, we can call any member of the county, everybody signed on, we can call in anybody. So if Agila Toss or New Tech or Innisfil is not affected by emergency, we might ask for resources. And those resources could be for any of our acts, from snow plowing to loaders to, as in the Angus incident with manpower. That's what we needed there to help them at that emergency. So it was after the Angus incident that your community emergency management coordinators decided that we needed to get a social or this agreement put together because we were so stretched for manpower and resources to handle the emergency. So emergency response plan. So again, every municipality shall formulate an emergency plan governing the provisions of necessary services during an emergency. That's pretty simple. The emergency plan of the municipality is required to formulate under subsection of the act and consists of emergency response plan. That's what this is, emergency response plan in theory. We don't define every emergency out there. We have, in here I have sections of emergencies, different emergencies that we would respond to, and I can give you a couple examples. So filtration plant could be an emergency if it was taken out. We had an exercise with the county and our filtration plant was involved in that exercise, that we had a terrorist event take out our filtration plant. So then a continuity of business, everything else come, but it affected not just us, it affected New Tech and other customers. So we have a hospital heliport in my plan, because that's an important thing with that helicopter coming into town, and if we had an emergency involving that. Red Cross is in here, the harbor, which is Dean's responsibility. Flooding, we have electrical part of the plan, winter alert response plan, and there's a bunch in the plan that we can use to develop our actions going forward if there's an emergency. So key elements is identify roles and responsibilities of emergency control group members, and I have a slide that explains who they are. Identify group notification emergency declaration procedures. So in the plan that we have, there's a section with all the forms we need. The mayor, or in his absence, head of council, or the premier can declare an emergency. And vice versa, we can end emergency, same people, and the premier seems to have a lot more power in that way. So there was a good talk with the county when we declared a crisis with the environment. The county was considering saying an emergency, and us as a group talked them out of that and said do the crisis, because as soon as you declare emergency, the premier will end the emergency. He won't allow it. So crisis was a better way to activate that. So in there we hit in the confidential annex, that's the private plan. Then we have contact information, hazard specific plans, which EPCOR wouldn't want their contact or their plans put out, so that's why we keep it and the directory, which we couldn't maintain this without the support that we get from a summer student each year, and the effort they put into the plan is astronomical for updating the infrastructure of the plan and our contacts. So the municipal control group, every municipality should have a municipal emergency control group. There's a lot that we are responsible for. Who we report to, the Chief Emergency Management of Ontario, which is Fire Marshal of Ontario. The group shall develop procedures to govern its responsibility in an emergency. They're finding us by mandating us to have these meetings that will help in that aspect, and our exercise requirements. So this is some of the control groups. So the boss of the yard is the CAO. So we have to, and his alternate is executive director Skinner, and Fried couldn't make the training this year, and Sonia was there, and we actually got a 10 out of 10 rating from the people who did our exercise for us. So it was very successful and well led. So Sarah has legal, so corporate, we called it a position of corporate service and legal support. Myself as liaison, and I'm gonna give a little funny, I'm a lobbyist in theory. I'm not a financial lobbyist, but I'm a support lobbyist. So I go out and create those relationships with the county, get the documents signed, and also with other partners in the community. Emergency information officer, that also, which you'll see in the next slide, that is, we shall have one, not may, so that's a shall position, which is very important. He directs with the mayor or whoever we deem to give out the information at the time. So, head of operations with the director of public works. Head of operation public safety is the deputy chief. I also have 3 officers on my department that are trained to my level, CMC level. So if there's anything happens, we have a lot of support in the control room. Head of planning is the deputy clerk. We just kind of finalized that after we did a debrief after our last exercise. We kind of had Becky doing way too much. She has a role now and she has a support role. And then head of finance is Marjorie, and she's the one who says where we get the money if we need the money. So a side note of that is that municipal housing affairs, we can apply for money, but is there money there? If the government makes money available, then we can apply for it. If it's not an emergency, then it might not be available for us. So some of the roles of the Emergency Operations Center is to manage and coordinate overall emergency response and recovery activities, decision makings, coordination of jurisdictional emergencies, emergency operations, informing, gathering, and dissemination of the information, and coordinating with other jurisdictions, agencies, and emergency management in Ontario. We do have more support there with the new fire marshal. He's assigned we had advisors and they were eliminated. Now we have advisor. It's a heck of a big area, but we still have an advisor now, so we have a little bit more support if something does happen. That's just I just wanted to make it known that it was shall have an employee as an emergency information officer, and when we hired the information officer or the communication officer, that's the role that's taken on, and that position must be appointed by bylaw also. Some of the tasks interface with site, media, and public and other agencies, develop accurate and complete information on the current situation, and basically oversee communications. And that's the communications officer's job is really to communicate with the mayor or head of council who's at the scene and the CAO to make sure we're giving the right information out in a timely manner and lots of updates. Plus, you needs to be updated because you're kind of in the dark. There's the mayor and the deputy mayor and CAO there, but you're in a whole nother area. So that's part of the communications officer's role, is to make sure you guys are also updated at the time. So we're required to have a hire. I have a hire. We have to update it. Part of my compliance is I have to update it annually. It became a lot easier when the ethanol plant closed. So as you imagine, in the risk analysis, the hire was up there, but it wasn't. It was so controlled by their ministries, it wasn't as big of a concern everybody thought in town. And hire babe. Review lists of provincial hazards. The county also does that. We list with it. The county does make it. They have their own emergency management department. They do make it a lot easier for us because they do some work for us in that way, and then they keep track of a list. So when I go to do it the following year, they might have identified something in our area for us to be able to put in the list. And infrastructure insurance plans. So. County adds sectors of its own. They have their own assets. We're not expected to look after the county assets in town, but they have support mechanisms I can draw on. So they have a manager of emergency management. She has 4 staff now, I believe it is, and the support we get out of there for training courses, anything that's going on is very valuable at this time. So finally, I guess the thing I'd like to say, and I hope you take it to heart, that I think we are prepared for emergencies and can handle it. We put a lot of effort into the program, and I think if something happened, we'd give a lot of effort back. So.
Chief, for that. Something we want to practice a lot and hopefully never have to implement.
For sure.
So before I let you go, because this is an SIC meeting, I will bring questions from the floor on the presentation we just heard. Seeing none, council, any questions or comments for the chief? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. We've had two incidents that come to mind when I think of emergencies in the last little while. We had a fire a couple weeks ago, not even a couple weeks ago, on the main street in Collingwood, and we also had a police incident over the Christmas holidays. Would either of those be considered emergencies in the book that you have? And after them, did you do a debrief? And can you share anything that you may have gleaned from that debrief with us here today?
So in my, no, they wouldn't qualify. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the plan or the group to mitigate any of the any of that. We can call the group together at any time. We can go over what's going on and assist us with it. Fire, I debrief with my staff. It's post-incident analysis, it's called a PIR. And we do that to make sure that anything we've done, we cover ourselves off and improve later. The instance with the OPP, I know that the CEO had us in. We did do a debrief on stuff, and we're working on things to improve that and develop a couple plans in town for that, but it wouldn't really fall under me. There's responsibilities everybody. But we did identify some stuff, and that's one thing that I know the CEO likes to do is debrief after anything, so he understands what's going on. So.
Thanks, CEO. Want to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Chief, for that presentation. Yeah, I mean, I think now it's signed in the fact that neither of those incidents would fall under the emergency activation. I think what we did is that in both instances we actually did debrief, and we talk a bit about how we would have done things differently. And I know the chief and I had a chat the night of the fire, and then after he returned after the fire, a bit of a discussion about how things could have been done differently. And the police incident on Main Street just before the holidays, I think we did the same thing. The other thing that I think we are doing as well is debriefing after major incidents outside of the municipality. So for example, when the issue in Caledon was a big issue, we did a debrief. In fact, we contacted Caledon to find out what they've learned from that experience and how we might benefit from that experience. We did the same thing when you had that major highway collision on Highway 26 just outside Stayner. We did the same thing in terms of talking to their emergency personnel, to the hospital. So we're actually doing a lot of preparatory work within the community based on our own non-emergency incident, but also looking at outside the community and how we might benefit from their experience as well and lessons learned.
I guess the only thing I would add is in our last exercise, you raised a good point, Chief. We had called together the emergency response team, but it wasn't until the situation continued to evolve that we actually declared the emergency. So we may have all the emergency responders in the room and be implementing the process, but it may not actually get to the point where we have to declare the emergency. But the wheels are turning. So it's definitely a fluid situation.
And through you, Chair, same with when we say the emergency's over, we want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for any liability anywhere or funding gaps or just liability because we didn't take something. So we just 2 days later the windstorm's over and we say the emergency's over. We don't. We really have to think it out to make sure that we cover ourselves, our assets, and any liability to the municipality.
Great. Any other questions? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to our fire chief. I know from our tour of the distillery business, council had a tour there, that you've been quite involved in that business, because I guess in some ways it's similar to an ethanol plant and what it does. So it just got me thinking about how, and I think this is something, our residents might be interested in knowing, like how do you know what's going on inside the various industrial buildings so that you can know that there's a hazard there you should be aware of.
So through you, Chair, so we have a program, and it's used to be called pre-planning, and we don't call that anymore because smart lawyers beat us up over it because we didn't do what we pre-planned. So what we do is building familiarization, and the importance with the HIAR is that we look at those buildings, especially industrial occupancies, to see what's going on with manufacturing. There is some components with certain acts, they have to supply me information of stockpile of how much, say fertilizers on site, or how much pure alcohols on site, say at the Collingwood Mist. So with those programs, that helps us to update and keep those higher also. And as I said before, with the county and the information they have, they might get different information through than we do. And then we follow up with the buildings to make sure we know the hazards to our municipality at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. You get to sit down now.
It wasn't too bad.
Next item, 6.2, is the striking committee SIC discussion, renewed vacancy of the BIA Board of Management. I'm going to pass it over to the CAO to introduce this topic.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say a few words about this before Council make a decision regarding the vacancy. The BIA continue to play a very important role in this community, and it's an integral part of our downtown sustainability strategy. I mean, I think the BIA is doing a tremendous amount of work with our business community to try and maintain the vitality and the importance of our downtown, and I think we've been blessed that we continue to enjoy a vibrant downtown, unlike many small municipalities that are experiencing the hollowing out of their downtown. So I think Council needs to consider carefully how we proceed in terms of filling this vacancy. My recommendation would be that Council should appoint a member on an interim basis to work with the business community and the BIA to try and strengthen what the BIA is doing to enhance the sustainability of the downtown area. There are a number of issues that we've got to look at, not the least of which is, and I know this has been a long-standing issue between the BIA and the municipality, to develop an MOU as to how we govern ourselves and to clearly identify the roles and responsibilities of the BIA and the corporation. I think more importantly as well, the BIA has to have the tools and the ability to do what it's required to do by its membership to maintain the vitality of the downtown area. So it is within that context that I think Council should consider whether or not they want to move on a more permanent basis, but my recommendation would be to perhaps appoint someone on a 6-month basis to do the kind of analysis and assessment and collaboration with the BIA and the business community, and perhaps look at a more permanent appointment after that quote-unquote interim period.
Thank you, CAO. So with that introduction, I will open the floor to Council for questions and comments. Councillor Madigan.
At what point would you like us to nominate someone?
Well, I think absolutely you can nominate, and I want to make sure that we're clear that under which recommendation we're proceeding. Otherwise, would it be the 6-month interim? If that's the thought of Council, then I guess what we put on the floor first would be that interim, and then look at nominations.
Okay, I'm happy to put that on the floor then.
Okay, the 6-month interim. So it's been moved by Councillor Madigan, seconded by Councillor Hamlin. Any questions or comments, Council, before we call the vote? Councillor Hamlin.
I think it's a great idea because it will give a deadline to getting some of these things done that maybe have been getting a little long in the tooth, like the finalization of the MOU. So, yeah.
Good, thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Now for nominations. Councillor Madigan.
I will gladly nominate Deputy Mayor Hull. I believe his extensive background within the whole community can give him a very good understanding of the ups and downs of the downtown. And I think he can be a real asset and bring some clarity with the communication.
Okay. Yes, before I look for a seconder, I'll ask the Deputy Mayor if you're prepared to stand for the position.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Is there a seconder for the nomination? Councillor Berman? Are there any other nominations? Councillor McLeod.
I'll nominate Councillor Doherty.
Councillor Doherty, do you accept the nomination? Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Comey. So we have, I'm gonna ask a third question then. In this situation, we need before comments from the candidates or just council comments. So then looking for, to the two candidates, you can take 2 minutes to outline your position and to support your candidacy. And I'll look first to the Deputy Mayor. Do you wish to speak?
Sure, thank you. Just first to acknowledge and disclose to the 8 of you around the table, when the resignation was made public, and I think it was the BIA that actually publicly endorsed the recommendation of Councillor Doherty. I did reach out to Councillor Doherty to indicate whether or not she, well, first to express that I had an interest in being the representative, but that if it was her intention to take the position, that I would be in a position to support that. And if it is the will of council tonight, I certainly would endorse that as well. What has changed, and I do like the approach of the 6 month, is that I'm concerned with some things that have happened in, say, the last month, and unfortunately in particular what transpired particular with the in-camera session that we had, and I have to leave it at that because of the nature of the fact that it was in camera. I think I recognize around the table that the BIA plays an important part within our downtown business community, that there are tremendous opportunities, but there are also at the same time some challenges that we all recognize. And given the background that I've got in terms of my past committee work as it relates to being on the Heritage Committee, the Affordable Housing Task Force, my role at the county, so therefore as it relates to maybe trying to steer or stick handle the garbage collection in a positive direction, I think that I could offer a number of those things in an interim basis that would hopefully establish clear direction as it relates to some of the things that we as a council have identified as being important. So, Your Worship, you had mentioned that, for example, trying to work with downtown business owners, landowners to fill vacancies within the second level of units. That's something that I've worked on in the past as it relates to affordable housing. It'd certainly be something that I would like to engage with them going forward. Heritage is an integral part within the downtown, and of course I've got that background and I've sat on that committee, and I think that I can offer that as part of my service. So I'll leave it at that in the sense that I think I've got a well-rounded background and on a 6 month basis can offer some continuity between this council and the board of the BIA and the membership as a whole to see if we can't turn things around in a proactive way.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, one of my strengths in this situation is that I have already been on the board. I know the players. I have also been formerly a business operator in downtown Collingwood, and so I'm very familiar with many of the issues that face individual businesses. I've had a number of discussions with members both of the board and just general members of the business community in downtown Collingwood, so I have a very good sense of where people's sentiments are today. I also have sat on the Heritage Committee. I'm, as you probably know, I'm a very heavy endorser of agri-transportation and that kind of use of our downtown. That said, I am very happy to accept whatever council decides on this interim basis and would offer my services whether I was on the board or whether I was not on the board.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Any questions or comments before I call the vote? We'll start first with the Deputy Mayor, and then pending that vote, we'll then proceed to Councillor Doherty. Are there any questions or comments before I call the vote on the Deputy Mayor? Seeing none, all in favor?
I assume
and that is carried. So thank you very much, everyone. And we will look forward to moving forward with the 6-month interim and coming back with an action plan. Membership of standing committees. Your comments?
So certainly we would have liked to have this happen in January, and moving forward, our procedure bylaw indicates that it may be reviewed annually. So I have not heard any interest at this point about switching committees. So what I would like to propose, if anybody does have any interest, to let me know, and we can look at a conversation at our next SIC meeting. But generally, the policy has been that if you're interested in switching, that you would negotiate a switch with a member of the other committee, and then bring that forward. However, if you have some strong opinions, we can obviously have a conversation for the next SIC.
Any questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, then we'll leave that. And 6.3, strategic plan requirement, reaffirmation of code of conduct. Your comments?
Certainly through the chair to members of council. So this is basically a reminder that this standing committee, together with the corporate and community services standing committee, formulates the next council agenda. And part of our community strategic plan has been to do an annual reaffirmation of the code of conduct. So you will find on that next agenda that we will have that resolution for council to consider.
Any questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, it takes us to item 6.4, pending list review. So I'll move it over to CAO then.
So thank you, Your Worship. We did circulate a list of all the items that Council requested reports on, and we did add to that list a number of what I call sort of good government pieces, which reflect what we as staff would have to do to keep the lights on. So in addition to the council-directed reports, there are a number of initiatives in there that reflects our, what I describe as our good government piece. Not to say that the council's element are not good government, but that's a better moniker for staff. There are 60 items on the list, and I should sort of preface my comments by saying that this is just the number of staff reports that we have to prepare. It doesn't reflect the day-to-day operational work that staff have to do. So this is not a reflection of the total workload. In fact, it's a fraction of what staff have to do on a daily basis to make sure that the departments are managed and run as efficient and effective as our citizen deserves. So depending on council's direction on the priorities, what I propose that we do is that there are a number of initiatives in here that can be dropped because we have actually completed some of those reports and recommendations, and I can point out what those are in a second. So depending on council's direction, what I'd like to do is to prioritize this list and also be given the authority to bundle some of these items. I'm concerned about items kind of making their way through the decision-making process on a one-off basis, and council not having a more comprehensive look at different items if they are related at either standing committee or at council. So I'd like to bundle these items and have them proceed through some kind of a thematic review so that you have the information to optimize your decision. So for example, all the items related to the official plan and official plan review should come before council at the same time. The items related to fees and charges should come to council at the same time as well. And all the governance issues, all the procedural bylaw issues, all of those things should be bundled and be addressed by council at the same time. So I'd like the luxury of being able to do that and not necessarily process these items based on the sequence with which they are noted in this listing here. The other point I'd like to also request council indulgence in is that we've attempted to put some target completion dates on these initiatives, and We've stayed away from specific months. We're looking at quarters, so Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, to give us some flexibility to be able to navigate some of these things as we prepare staff reports and also look at bundling them in the way I just described. So those would be my opening comments. I can go through the list if it's council's will. I'm sure you've had a chance to look at it, so perhaps it's better for us to take some questions on the list. And then if it is council's desire, I can take your direction and come back on the 18th with a more refined list that reflects your priorities and some potential bundling.
Thank you, CAO. I think first we'll go around and look for questions, and then I'll go around and then ask for recommendations. So starting first with questions, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to the CAO. When I was reviewing the list, I also saw that there might be some opportunities to bundle some of these. For example, there's 2 items, 9 and 10, having to do with traffic calming, so it just made sense. So I would agree very strongly with that. There were some individual items that I from my point of view, I thought maybe we would have the opportunity to extend our deadline. One of those was the accessibility multi-year plan, in that we have a plan in place, and perhaps this was something that could be.
What number is that, Councillor?
That is number 31. That perhaps that could go to Q3 or Q4 of this year.
I'm just hearing from the clerk that we don't have an updated plan, so it's part of updating the existing plan.
Oh, okay, so I thought we had something in place for 2020. Okay, I apologize. Another item was number 38, the market destination fee. While I endorse that initiative, and quite frankly, I think it's something that we should be looking seriously at, with this timing, which is Q2, we would miss the summer anyway. So I wonder if there would be an opportunity to postpone that into Q3 or even into early Q4.
Through you, Your Worship. Actually, the acceleration of this was my fault because staff was pushing this out, and I sort of encouraged them to expedite the report because I'm cognizant that, in my view, this should have been addressed as part of our 2020 budget. We missed the boat on that, and I know Deputy Mayor Hall had a particular interest in this, so it was my insistence that we try and deal with it in an expedited way. So even if we're not able to implement it in the summer or before that, I think it'd be good for council to deliberate on the actual report and the recommendations, and council can decide if and when they want it to be effective. But I'd rather us dealing with this sooner rather than later, because this could be a potential revenue source among other things.
Yes. Well, it's even better. So that said, item 16, the staff review the opportunity to review a zoning policy specific to infill housing and potential overlay. That is one, in my view, to bundle with the rest of planning and postpone until 2021. Does give me some concern. I think that some of the issues that are arising relative to infill housing won't wait. We have a growing number of applications, and so that is one element. While included in planning, I would personally hope that we could address this year.
See you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Director Farr can respond as well. But I think we'll take direction from council. I'm not averse to us bringing a report back to council on what it would take to accelerate and expedite this in advance of the official plan. The only caution I would put on the table though is that if we were to move to a full-fledged review of this, it's gonna cost us some additional resources, not budgeted for. The deferring or the consideration of it as part of the official plan will allow for a more robust and comprehensive review. But if it is council's will, we're prepared and we could bring a report back to council to more clearly articulate what kind of resources it would take to get this done in advance of the official plan. I don't want to embark on this without council's concurrence on the resources that we require. Because planning staff right now, they're working flat out because of the official plan and all the development applications they have before them. So if council deems this to be a priority, we'll have to give something up, or extend the official plan timeline, or bring some additional resources in-house to do some of this. But we can bring a report that reflect those considerations if it is council's will to do that.
Thank you.
Director Farr, do you want to add to that?
I think the CO captured the issues perfectly.
Thank you.
And those are my comments.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wright. Any other comments? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only matter I wanted to address was the last one, item number 16, about the policies for infill housing. I would also be in support of council dealing with that issue this year. I have given this some thought because I did speak to Director Farr about the resource issue. And perhaps I will sort of take this quote offline after the meeting, because I have had some thoughts, even since my discussion with Director Farr, about whether we could do a more constrained infill housing, sort of Band-Aid approach, if I can put it that way, pending a more fulsome opportunity to look at all this maybe after the official plan review is concluded. So I just wanted to put that on the table and say I'll talk with staff further. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, council? Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, Mayor Saunderson. My two comments relate both to items 38 and 40. And that's the accommodation tax and then the short-term accommodation analysis and direction. So as it relates to the accommodation tax, I know that this is something that Councillor Madigan raised last term, and he and I are on the same page that we'd love to see this move forward. My comment specific to both of them is just that I really believe strongly that if this is going to be effective, it has to be a regional approach. And we need desperately to have our neighbors to the west, south, and east on board to make any type of policy effective, especially as it relates to short-term accommodation. If we're on different pages, then the consumer will quickly identify where they can sort of play and can't play. Thanks.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions about the individual items, then I'm looking for a recommendation based on the comments of the CAO, authorizing staff to go back and bundle these and come back with recommendations in terms of priorities, and then council will then consider that and go from there. Are you moving that?
I'm definitely moving that with the caveat that if in the meantime that we do come up with some questions, we can just send them directly to the CAO, and he can take those into consideration as he's choosing to bundle which ones.
Certainly. Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Berman. Any comments or questions on the? So then I'll call a vote. All in favor of the recommendation? And it's carried unanimously. That concludes other business. Public delegations. Is there anyone that would like to come forward? Ms. McKenzie, come on down, please. Next time, if you just state your name, that would be good. I don't get your address now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Wendy McKenzie. This is in regards to 189 2nd Street. I was here a bit ago and I asked some questions, and one of the questions was I had requested a property survey. Well, there was a partial survey that was submitted. The partial survey would be an 1889 survey. It tells us that the lot is 89.57 feet frontage by 67.96 feet deep. I wanted to see a copy of a new survey. You have to have a new survey in this town to build a fence. let alone this monstrosity that's put up across the road from us. And I wanted to know how they came up with the 40% for infilling. Does that include the garage? And then I asked for a definition of the minor variance. There is no definition of a minor variance in the official plan or zoning bylaw. Oh, but there is. What is a minor variance, Town of Collingwood? A minor variance is a small variation from the requirements of the zoning bylaw. Your stuff. And so they asked for 3 minor variances, and I asked what the cost was, and they approximately $550 were paid. But they asked for 3 minor variances. So a minor variance application fee is $1,560. Why wasn't it times 3? They did 3 variances. So like you're kind of doing yourself out, and the minor variance rules are D131, $1,560, so it should have been $4,680. So yes, you need the complete fence, and I've already gone over these with most of you guys here. To decrease the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters down to 4.44 meters, therefore a decrease of 7.06 meters. That's not small. That's 21 feet less in the rear yard. The minimum side yard setback from 1.2 meters to 0.22, thus a decrease of 0.98 meters, approximately 3 feet less. C, to reduce general provision 4.28.4 titled Special Yard Encroachment from the rear yard setback from 4.5, oh, they changed this and just went ahead and did it to from 2.1 to decimal 12. Therefore, a decrease of 4.38 meters over 13 feet. None of these have even come close to the definition of Collingwood's minor variance. So when were you going to tell us, like you sent this notice out to us like 2 years ago of what they were going to do with the property. We all looked at it and said, okay, that seems fine. I've submitted to a few of you the copy of what was shown on that variance. And it came with approximately the time of our 2018 January tax bill. You advised one of us that all of these changes, if you were informed of what was to originally happen, you would have probably looked at it as we did in close proximity to the households and gone along with this. This is not what happened here. How do you plan to fix this for us now?
So, Wendy, I appreciate your comments. This is an SIC meeting. You spoke to the OpDev Standing Committee, which is meeting next Monday, and I know you've had a meeting with Director Farr.
Yes.
So what I'd suggest is you can maybe follow up with those questions with Director Farr, and then come next week and speak to the Operations Development Committee, who's
Okay,
this
well,
is specific.
2 councillors told us to come to this meeting, so 5 of us are here for this meeting.
Okay, well, this is a Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting. It doesn't deal with planning issues.
Okay, well then we're all at the wrong meeting.
Okay, so we'll get you next Monday, but in the interim, I encourage you to speak with Director Farr, who I know you've met with.
Okay.
And if I can be involved in that in any way, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or input from the public? Seeing none, then I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jeffrey, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, everyone.